Thank you for your patience around us getting the technology set up, but we are now ready for... I am yelling. For people who have participated in the whole IIDL program will realise that one of the most exciting parts of this event is actually the exchanges. And we often have people asking to attend more than one exchange because they don't know which one to choose. So at this time of the day, we try to share some of the exchanges that you were not able to attend. And some of the other exchanges will have marketplaces following morning tea. But this morning we have two of the exchanges that were held on Monday and Tuesday. We have Bruce Uditsky who hosted the Family Leadership Exchange, and we have Katina Clay, who hosted the Citizen Advocacy Exchange. And I just will start by looking at the Family Leadership Exchange. This is an exchange that has been in place really since the beginning of IIDL, and really looking at how do we not only build family leadership but sustain families over that leadership journey. And we're fortunate this year to have had Bruce Uditsky hosting that exchange, and Bruce has international recognition for his leadership in advocacy and social justice issues for people with disabilities. He's been involved in Alberta's education standards for people with disabilities. He currently serves in an advisory capacity to government and really played a leading role in the development of the Rotary Employment Partnership, which those on the Employment Exchange spoke about earlier in the week. So Bruce, thank you very much.
Thanks. Someone will be timekeeper for me, I presume, because otherwise people will be here till late this evening if we're not cautious. So I'm going to be attempting to share the experience of a fairly, I think people would describe, intense 2 days on the Family Leadership Exchange that took place in Alberta with 18 participants, as you can see, from Argentina, Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, and the United States. And I will honestly not do service or justice to the work that people did in the course of those 2 days, so this will be probably a broad overview or snapshot. And if there's time, then there may be opportunities, because many of the participants are in the room today, to add or share their personal perspective. I think maybe telling, if I could be so bold, as to the fact that towards the end of the last session, for those of you that were here, there was a question about families, in fact, which rarely actually appeared through the course of the entire set of presentations, which is, I think, kind of interesting and worth maybe taking a moment to think about why that's the case. So I know I'm going to be using this morning language or concepts that are ill-defined, have a checkered history, have some degree of ambiguity, and that there isn't time in the context we have to try to go into depth or explain those to you. Just the very notion of families, particularly in some contexts today, is contentious, controversial. We have a checkered history relative to families that have had sons and daughters with intellectual disabilities, as to our position relative to their worth and value in society and community life. The term inclusion has been so co-opted as to mean literally anything today, so it requires the necessity, in fact, to define it very specifically, etc. And even the concept of community and movements in and of themselves are issues that are, in fact, worthy and continue to be substantially debated. So that caveat having been said, I'm going to proceed nevertheless, and we'll see where and when there might be opportunity to further describe what we mean by those. When we use the term families in the context of the exchange and exchanges, and one of our interests, by the way, as Lorna mentioned, there have been exchanges since the inception, I think, of IIDL or close to it, was to in fact build on previous exchanges and to try to extend beyond what people had discussed and sort of considered previously. And so when I'm talking about families, for lack of better explanation at the moment, I mean inclusive of people with disabilities, and we are primarily been families around who have sons and daughters, family members, brothers and sisters, etc., with intellectual or related developmental disabilities. So we're talking about families in the context of being inclusive of their family members with disabilities, inclusive of friends, allies, community members, etc. And our interest, if you want, is in family leadership development to further the idea of taking, in fact, collective action to try to create what we believe is a needed social movement for inclusion. And we will, I think, for quite some time yet, continue to work on the need for systems transformation, government policies, funding mechanisms, the provision of supports and services, how to access them, their individuality, their personalization. But I would probably contend or argue, if you prefer, that that's not going to transform community. And there can't be inclusion and truly inclusive lives comparable to those without disabilities, unless there in fact is community and in turn a transformation of community. And so that's what our interest is in families. When we have looked at other movements that are particularly well known, I believe there are supposed to be climate change strike going on today for high school students. Is anybody aware of that? Right? So people can easily relate to environmental movement. They can describe what that is. They may not even belong to an organization affiliated with the environmental movement. They may define themselves as supporting climate change or not supporting climate change. They may be subject to the oppression of their young children, telling them they're not recycling properly, etc. Why are they drinking from that plastic straw? And so on. There's a social consciousness in quite a number of places today about the need, in fact, to address environmental issues, to preserve ecological diversity, etc. But the same doesn't exist relative to the interests of people with intellectual disabilities to live lives that are fully inclusive across the entirety of their lifespan and related to their own unique personalities and individuality. So we want, in fact, to see what we can do to try to further the advancement of an actual social movement that impacts community and raises social consciousness such that families who, when they have a child diagnosed or identified with a disability, do not have to learn everything all over again, repeat the experience, basically be potentially moved into a stream or pathway of life that takes them outside of an inclusive life. We took some time to look at current approaches to family leadership, and this is just basically a sample of some of the topics we dealt with. There's probably double the number of topics that are here on the list that we were looking at. So we found when we went around and talked to each other that there were essential and common elements that we were doing with respect to leadership development. We know there's an issue about the credibility of families in the context of the larger disability rights movement, and that continues to be a contentious issue today as to where we sit at those tables. The UN CRPD, I think it's General Comment 7, references the role of families in relationship to people with intellectual disabilities and others in relationship to children. We want to ensure, in fact, as families, that that particular article and its interpretation through that comment are lived out in practice. And we spent some time trying to understand what kind of organizational structures would we need as a social movement in order for us to be able to thrive and potentially be more successful in advocating for social change. So we're looking to further find ways to continue and create a scalable model of societal change, and we think that requires a vibrant social movement. In our experience, if you want to those around the table those 2 days, many people did not identify themselves in the sense as you want as part of a movement. They might have identified themselves as part of an organization, for example, or part of a collection of families, but not really describe themselves as a movement and understand what in fact that would mean. So we don't actually even potentially have that kind of language describing our effort after decades of advocacy. And we want to try to get closer to achieving the kind of social change we've seen other movements describe. There have been a number of pieces written on the fact that some other social movements in a shorter period of time, if you want, than the movement for the equality of people with intellectual disabilities have gained greater ground in a shorter period of time than we have in decades. And it requires a critical analysis as to why that's the case. Why is there a greater degree of social consciousness, at least in many of our contexts, relative to other populations? Why is it something people are discussing at the dinner table, in the news, recognizing, in fact, their own particular set of values relative to different groups in our culture, and there isn't the same with respect to people with intellectual or even other disabilities? And we wanted to take a look at what have other movements able to teach us? What have they potentially required in order to have some degree of success relative to our own efforts? And these aren't particularly new or innovative, or they're well known. A common vision, for example. So that will require work in terms of better articulating, defining more readily and easily for people to grasp and understand what an inclusive life actually looks like. What's particularly interesting is that in most cultures, most people without disabilities live an inclusive life. They just don't talk about it that way, right? That's not something that they consider because it's so taken for granted, actually. And so if we can relate to the fact that a person, irrespective of the nature of their disability, is no different in their humanness and have the same desires, aspirations, hopes, dreams, wanting to contribute, to participate, to belong, to have relationships, to be needed, etc., then potentially there's a greater possibility for people without disabilities to identify in terms of common humanness, and as a consequence, thereby understand the degree of rejection, oppression, marginalization that they are contributed to and need to, in fact, alter in their own lives. We see movements needing, an ongoing investment in values-based kind of leadership development and a continual process of renewal, which means there was a topic yesterday, I think, on emerging leaders, the necessity to continually bring in, new leaders, both family members and allies, just as we see young people picking up causes today and being a force, in fact, for change. A movement requires a deep understanding of, I'm sort of reading off the PowerPoint, a deep understanding of the cultural and historical forces of devaluation. When families first encounter in still too many places the resistance of a school system, right, and they hear it's a question of resources or funding or expertise, and begin to perceive that their role then and mission is to find more money or more resources, they've misunderstood the nature of the problem. Because it's not a question of funding or resources, it's a question of leadership, values, and will. And to the greater degree families have that information, for example, the better capacity and ability they have actually to negotiate and navigate those systems that put up barriers. I'm not going to go through all of them because there isn't necessarily enough time to do that, but they need actually a theory of change. How are we going to transform and change community? What's been successful in the past? How do we raise community social consciousness and capacity to identify with people with disabilities? We need multiple strategic endeavors. Doesn't mean we all act with the same actions, but we all have a common purpose, a common endeavor, and actually to speak as a movement. When we listened to each other around the table and found that many of us have been engaged, sometimes for quite some time, on active processes of developing family leadership. These were some of the elements that we, if you want, extracted from listening to each other that were common. There were many more, but these are some of what I'm listening to now. And that is to listening now. And that was to ensure that however we bring people together to facilitate their leadership development, to recognize their own capacity to affect change, we needed to do that in a way that created diversity. We needed families that came from many different walks of life, listening and working, collaborating together. Needed to ensure in the culture that's appropriate, there are indigenous families represented, racialized families represented, families that, for example, lived in rural communities, families that lived in urban, etc., so that people could see their common connectedness, what was at the heart of their efforts, and irrespective of their station or place in life and community, we had a common cause and a common purpose. We need the initiatives and the movement to be family-led, again, inclusive of people with intellectual disabilities, but not exclusive of families. That is, we want and need, of course, allies, community members, aligned professionals, bodies, etc. I've already mentioned the need for people to understand history. We need a better capacity means to illustrate what a meaningful, inclusive, contributory life can look like over time. Still, it's not common enough for families when they have a child with a disability to understand intuitively, if you want, or immediately, to have known what a life can look like that's fully inclusive. Where have they seen it? Where have they experienced it? Where is it known to them? Where is it common to them? So if it's foreign to them and seems alien if you want, and not possible, then they are subject, if you want, to narrowing their vision, to limiting the dreams and hopes and possibilities, and as a consequence, it's likely they're not going to pursue the possibilities that are open to them. So we need more people aware generally, whether or not they have a child with disabilities, or because we never know who will, so to speak. There's a contentious issue there, who will have a child with disabilities, that what is possible to make it visible and present in the lives of community. So we've been working on establishing greater critical thinking, making sure there's a safe space for people to learn, think, and time to do so. And that what's critical to family leadership development from our perspective over the 2 days, it's where they fit into a movement, that it's a call to action. It's not just about improving the life of your family member or relative with a disability. In fact, it's about joining a larger movement. In that way, it means dealing with maybe your colleagues at work, the people you hang out with, etc., the people you associate with on the weekends, that in every instance, you have an opportunity, if you want, to change minds, to change hearts, and to maybe over time contribute to a change in culture and understanding. How am I doing for time? I'm talking as fast as I can. But I'm going to take a drink. We took a little time to try to imagine, because not many of us felt we truly had this yet, what would we need as a movement by way of organizational support? We wanted to shift from organizations sometimes, particularly maybe national bodies, seeing themselves as the movement, so to speak. Because a social movement is much more, in fact, than an organization. An organization can provide what's sometimes called in social change the backbone, if you want, to a movement. And so rather than focus, in this instance, for example, we know a lot more, even if we're not there yet, on what organizations that provide supports and services to people with disabilities should look like. We know a lot less about what an organization that provides support to a family movement for inclusion should look like. That is not something we seem to have a lot of knowledge and experience with. So some of the things we thought would be needed within a context of an organizational structures that support a social movement of this kind would be distributed multi-level leadership. So it's not single leaders at the top, for example, but leadership at every level of the effort of the movement being supported. That there would, of course, be intentional leadership development, but that it's movement focused. so people have a greater understanding of how they can, what have social movements learned, what mistakes have they made, what are they doing that's been successful, and how can we capitalize on that in terms of our own interest as a movement. We need to enable families and allies to come together, share knowledge. We need a means to facilitate a greater degree of communication through the multiple modes of media that exist today, actually. Given all the ways of which people are receiving, if you want, information, how much information is flowing out that actually illustrates what fully inclusive community lives look like over time, irrespective of the nature of disability? How much information is flowing out coherently and consistently with respect to the marginalization, devaluation that people experience? How much flows out that illustrates to communities so they can see themselves in the picture as to where they belong and the difference in the contribution they can make? Because in fact, we can't alter what's taking place in the context of community rejection without community realizing this and taking a different step forward. We need, it's already been mentioned, financial resources. Wanted to put that out there because it continually comes up. But at the same time, if we only focus on the limits of funding, we don't necessarily focus on what can be built within the context of the resources that are currently available to us. This is not something I'm familiar with, but I understand, for example, on Instagram there are influencers. And even people who are, that's one way people have made money, actually. Right? We need connected influencers. If that's, depending on the culture you're in, if that's the context we're now living in some places and societies, for example, and that's how influence and change is being created and excitement is being propagated, then we need to be in those contexts as well, for example. And of course, always, not only to be opportunistic, but thoughtful in terms of timing and actions. And a movement cannot survive without continuous grassroots engagement. There has to be a place people can identify that they belong, a space they can occupy, etc., and to know they have a rightful voice to help create the needed change. So, to conclude, in effect, I'll read this to you rather than try to summarize it. What our aspirations are to further contribute to the development of a social movement for inclusion led by families, inclusive of individuals with intellectual disabilities, friends, allies, and communities. Big picture as that sounds, we know there are other movements that have done this with less historical structure and organizations than we have at our beck and call at the moment in time, actually. Okay? Others have sprung up more spontaneously, if you want, captured the public's imagination to a greater degree, sooner and more and easier than we have. We need to learn from that. We need to exercise those same mechanisms, in fact, and we need to be as present in the minds of people in our community as our other social interests at the moment. We have committed ourselves to not just meet annually through IIDL, for which we're very grateful, but to gather regularly, to use the technology to do so when possible, share, learn, expand by inviting others in, and further develop our leadership capacity and ability to act collectively. One of our participants over the course of the 2 days, we're quoting her now, said, in effect, what we want is a community in which when a person with a disability shows up and or their family, they don't have to ask to be welcomed. They don't have to be pushed to be invited. But in fact, the community, whether it's the classroom teacher, whether it's the soccer or football team, whether it's the employer, whether it's the youth group hanging out around the corner, for example, do kids still do that? Not sure, etc., or playing video games online and so on. The expectation is that the community will say to you, we were expecting you, welcome. That's the change we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. It is interesting to reflect on where do strong and powerful disabled people come from. And where you see strong and powerful families, you see strong and powerful disabled people. And so to overlook the role of families does a disservice to disabled people. And I think, Bruce, just listening to your story about the need for welcome brings me back to an issue that Sif raised yesterday and also during the week in our exchange, which she termed universal courtesy. And we can all play our part in being universally courteous to every human being. So I thank you for that. I've been now given the challenge of knowing what to do with these slides, which I don't know about Twitter, but just even that is enough for me. But while Aisling, see, you have to be young. While Aisling does the right thing here, I'd just like to introduce both Katina Clay and Sue Robertson. They are going to talk to us about the Citizen Advocacy exchange. Katina hosted the exchange and Sue was a participant on the exchange. Katina's role is as coordinator of statewide citizen advocacy, and Sue is a parent and also a citizen advocate from New Zealand. So welcome, Katina and Sue. I will pass on to you.
After Bruce, I just want to say amen. Good morning. This has been wonderful, right? I'm so humbled to be here, and I owe a big thank you to Michael Kendrick for that. So I'm Katina Clay. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I work with the Georgia Advocacy Office, and we're privileged to have among us the executive director of the Georgia Advocacy Office, Ruby Moore. And it's without her that I would not have been here and have this opportunity. So thank you to Ruby, and also to you, Michael. So the Georgia Advocacy Office is the protection and advocacy system for the state of Georgia for people with developmental disabilities and mental illnesses. It is where we advocate for those alleging abuse and neglect and rights violation and much more. It is where we envision a Georgia where all people have value, visibility, and voice, where even the most difficult and long-lasting challenges are addressed by ordinary citizens acting voluntarily on behalf of another, and where the perspective of disability is replaced by the recognition of ability. In my role there, I am the statewide citizen advocacy coordinator and for citizen advocacy programs around the state. Citizen advocacy was founded by a man by the name of Wolf Wolfensberger, and it's been around for 40 years. We work on building one-to-one relationships with people in the community. And one may have a disability, and the other we see as an individual who comes from the center of society and culture. We have been doing this for the purpose of saving lives, for people with developmental disabilities, for making people's lives bigger and better. So I'm here today really because of this match, and I'm humbled because of that, to tell you a little bit about citizen advocacy and a way of access, accountability, and action. And I'm going to do that through this short video that I'm going to show you. I'll come back and say some final words, and then we'll hear from Sue, who experienced it for herself.
Citizen advocacy has been creating relationships for over 35 years. Bringing two people together to care for one another is the heartbeat of Macon Bibb citizen advocacy. For centuries, the most powerful medium of transmitting cultural wisdom has been storytelling, and the best way to describe citizen advocacy is through stories. And the stories bring citizen advocacy alive. Giving oneself to another human being in friendship is a precious gift. The power of two people opening themselves to one another in trust, without any pretense or threat to the continuity of friendship, cannot be overstated. Yet the bond of a deep friendship is a safe haven against the trials and inequities of life. Through the investment of love and time, advocates have found suitable and safe housing, secured employment, become a guardian when needed, made a commitment to be a representative payee, helped access good health care, and stood with and for a friend indeed. These stories give witness and insight to a deeper grace.
11 years ago, not long after I moved here, Rabbi Aaron mentioned Connie Flair's name to me and told me about citizen advocacy and said, I think this is something that would interest you. So I met Connie for coffee, I think a week later, and Connie was showing me pictures, and I was thinking, I don't know if this is right for me. And it's like, she taught me about she was talking about the different people that needed assistance, needed an advocate. And I thought, oh, could I do something like that? But then she showed me pictures, and I saw Alexia, and I fell in love with her picture immediately. And I thought, I have to meet that little girl. There's something about her smile just tugged at something in my heart. And just this little thing with this little voice. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was just, like I said, instantly in love again.
When we first met, I was scared to meet her because I never met a nice person like her before, and I was like afraid to meet her. And sometimes I usually be bad when I was little. But I didn't like give her a chance, but when I got used to her, I really like Miss Jo. She like my friend and like a sister, because I could talk to her.
She went from this little thing without much of a voice to this strong sounding person. I've seen her evolve. I mean, her interests changed, where she fell in love with books, and going to Barnes & Noble is a popular thing for us. We love to go there, and I can sit and read my book, she can sit and read hers. She's not afraid to be by herself. She'll go off and do your own thing at Barnes & Noble and just come back, you know? So she'll read magazines, books, I mean, and we're talking, of course, we talk about going to Paris, and I promised her when she graduates from college, we will go to Paris. I said, I don't care what I have to do, I'll hawk anything, we will go to Paris. We've read about France, and I buy her things that are made in France, and we look at the weather in Paris.
I would like to go to Paris because I want to learn French, and I want to try different kinds of food, and I just like enjoy going different places.
We've been to the Savannah and toured, played tourist and ate different foods. I introduced her to sushi, I'm sure much to her family's dismay.
I didn't want to try sushi, but when she was telling me how good it is, I was like, okay, I guess I'll try one. And it had like cream cheese in it, so I'm like, wow, this is good.
She's very proud of the fact that she's the only one in the family that will eat those things. We visited a candy factory, we've baked together, we've made smoothies. So she's interested in healthy food, and I always love to try new foods, and she does too. She's very comfortable with my husband, Steve. She was in our wedding 2 years ago. And she always told me, she goes, Miss Jo, when you get married, I want to be in your wedding. So it's not ever going to happen.
Steve, he says I'm a part of his life also. They love me, and they say I'm like, they couldn't be here without me, and they was glad I was a part of their wedding. I wanted to do it, and she didn't believe that she would be married at an age like this. But I kept on motivating her that she is going to get married one day.
She makes me laugh at myself more. She can make me, she knows when I make a mistake or something, she'll gently bring it to my attention. And she's even told me how to drive a time or two.
So I just feel so fantastic when she's around me.
For me, I've kind of have like a big sister role in Alexia's life. And like I said, it depends on the person's needs, but be aware there can be challenges, but be aware there can be a lot of fun too. You can open yourself to new possibilities, and you can challenge yourself. It's been an amazing journey for both of us. And I told her I want to babysit for her children when she has children someday. Not that I'm pushing her, believe me, but I want to be in her life as long as I'm living.
Choose happiness is our motto.
Don't think you can't do something, because you can.
Citizen advocacy happens when we welcome another into our hearts to allow ourselves to be touched, changed, and challenged. Advocates and protégés enjoy a unique relationship. Spending time together can be spontaneous, unplanned activities. Other times, activities together are planned, including shopping, dining out, and recreation. For some who are still at risk of exclusion, a citizen advocate helps bridge this social gap by providing a voice for those who lack the knowledge or confidence to speak for themselves.
Our first meeting was quiet. Wasn't a lot of conversation because, we began to feel one another out. In the back of my mind, I said, Mr. Fraser, who is the man behind the name? And I was trying to figure out how can I learn the man behind the name.
When relationships come together, it's no longer rare to hear someone say,
As I spent time with Mr. Fraser, I began to, there is a man behind the name, a man that thinks, got ideas, and can make decisions. You never think about people being stuck away in a rest home. You never, until you go in and feel what they feel and walk in their shoes, you begin to see he can't go to the refrigerator and get him a Coke. He can't get him a sandwich. He has to take a bath when someone tells him to take one. What I noticed about Mr. Fraser, he was very much afraid to step out into life. There's a whole world out there that I really didn't understand until I met Mr. Fraser. One of the key things we found out that he liked to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken. He loved fried chicken, right? Mm-hmm. And he really enjoyed Christmas time. We go to the mall. He hadn't experienced all of that beauty. And a lot of times I just carry him with me. Sometimes we go to hardware stores and Lowe's and Kmart's and places like that, and he hadn't experienced Bass Pro Shop, and it's just like going to the grocery store. We go to the grocery store. He had never experienced all of this food. Citizen Advocate is a great organization. There's a lot of support. Will help you along the way, and at first I think you would have to put yourself, do you want to help somebody? Do you feel like sharing your life with somebody? You had a good life, you've been free. Do you feel like pulling somebody up alongside of you and be a blessing to somebody else? That's what it's all about, is, giving someone the thing that you have received and that you have enjoyed, It really doesn't cost anything but time and compassion and love.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
Because I teach political science, I thought it was some political organization that was trying to get in touch with me about something, and I realized that it's not a political organization. It's about building relationships and matching up people in the community with someone who is at risk for being excluded from the community, someone with a disability, a developmental disability, who might not otherwise come into your life.
Making space in our community, and most important of all, in our hearts, takes time. Only through shared experiences do we learn to respect each other's gifts and talents.
She introduced me to Meredith. We went and had lunch at Applebee's, and I liked her right away. I didn't know much about her at that point. Over time, I've gotten to know her a lot better, and she's gotten to know me. But we really enjoyed doing things together. It's not just a spectator thing for us when we come to the basketball game. It's really about supporting people that we've met and want to encourage and really want to be successful. So we can be part of what's going on, not just watch from the stands.
But it's not all giving, it's also receiving. The gifts that are unexpectedly received, not wanting anything in return.
One of the things that's really cool about my friendship with Meredith is that she really shows me the world in a different way. So I see the world through her eyes. It's an exciting place full of surprises and people that she wants to know, and sometimes I can forget that, but she reminds me of it. Meredith always makes me laugh, and that's a wonderful gift that she gives to me, to take myself less seriously, to look at the world in a different way. I really think of her as part of my family now, so when I have family come to town, they ask about Meredith, we get together. She knows my nieces and nephews, my mom and dad, my sisters and brother-in-laws, and so she's really part of my family.
Lives have been changed in many positive ways. This has happened because advocates have made a commitment in their relationship.
I became concerned about the situation that she was living in and whether it was a good situation for her, and I kept getting not very good answers from the people that were being paid to take care of her.
Vulnerability is always present in the lives of people with disabilities. The advocate's awareness of this vulnerability is important and an instrument for providing protection.
I became her legal guardian. I took more of an official role in her life. And I think that's part of what citizen advocacy is too. It's being willing to step out on behalf of someone who can't speak up for themselves and who might not be able to protect their own interests. It wasn't always easy. There were plenty of times where I would get frustrated and think, I don't know how anybody deals with this system, but I was always really grateful that I could be there for Meredith in that.
Citizen advocacy is a relationship form of protection. Over the years, Lori has spoken up for Meredith on many occasions. Lori's presence in Meredith's life has made her less vulnerable.
Most of the people that I know in citizen advocacy feel a connection right away to the goals of the organization, to what it's trying to do in the community. There's no one way to do citizen advocacy. It's really about the relationship between the advocate and the protege and how that developed.
For over 35 years, advocates and proteges have forged strong relationships, each bringing to the table of life their gifts, each providing their unique palette of individuality for the great artist which lies within.
The best way to find out about citizen advocacy is to spend time with people who are involved in it.
If you are interested in becoming an advocate and want more information, contact Macon Bibb Citizen Advocacy at 478-743-1521 or visit our website at maconbibbcitizenadvocacy.org. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
As you can see, close personal relationships are the ultimate safety net for each of us, where we can count on support when we cannot stand up for ourselves or make ourselves heard. Citizen advocacy recognizes that while people living with developmental disabilities often face huge hurdles in their lives, they are less likely than most of our neighbors to have such relationships. One-to-one citizen advocacy relationships connect proteges who are experiencing social isolation or other risks with a member of the community to stand beside them. The goal is to provide protection and advocacy. The form this advocacy takes depends on the individual situation and can involve such actions as helping proteges find their voice, help find employment, stay in their own homes rather than being institutionalized, or find ways around the separation and isolation of social service systems that make ordinary opportunities impossible. These relationships that you witnessed in the video has deeply enriched the lives of advocates and also proteges. One of the secrets to citizen advocacy is that it's founded upon several key principles that make for natural supports that we all have in our lives. Each citizen advocacy relationship is freely given and freely received. Each citizen advocate is independent of human services, the Citizen Advocacy Office, and if necessary, the protege's family. Loyalty to the person allows the advocate to speak out and act with freedom and clarity. Most citizen advocacy matches are established with the hope of developing a long-lasting relationship. Some of these last for a lifetime. And each citizen advocate looks for ways to bring his or her protege's needs and gifts and talents to the larger community in ways that is dignified and enhancing to the person. Before Sue comes up, I'll just close with this. You all saw many stories or heard stories from advocates on the video, but this one touched my heart that I just want to leave with you that just shows the power of citizen advocacy. So Howard was just 14 years old when he was sent off to an institution where 10,000 other people lived with disabilities. Nobody knew why he was sent there, he just was for 50 years. Big questions around this silent, gentle, and graceful man. Who was he really? Unable to use words to communicate, surrounded by paid staff who directed his life, he was alone and vulnerable. No one knew him. No one tried to get to know him. The Citizen Advocacy Office was told about Howard and introduced Howard to a man by the name of Al. Over time, Al has come to know Howard well and discovered he enjoys many things, including folk music, concerts, sitting on the porch, chewing tobacco, visiting with friends, and meeting people. Their brotherly bond makes Howard's life richer and also safer. And as Al does his best to see Howard's world through Howard's eyes and to be his voice. You'll often hear Al say many times to Howard, thank you for allowing me to be in your life, and thank you for making me be a better person and for changing my life. That is the unexpected gift of citizen advocacy. It is the power of relationships, and that's the power that we all have that we can give back, is the relationships. Thank you. Now I would like to bring up Sue Robertson, who come to Georgia, and we have enjoyed her. We rolled out the Southern hospitality, and she gave it back to us from New Zealand. Okay.
Go to sit here. Thanks, Katina. Isn't it wonderful when the night before an international conference you're invited to speak? And I thought if ever this was the time to go low tech, this is it. Because I carry around this little notebook with me to write down, just words of wisdom that people share. And on the front of my little notebook it says, once you choose hope, anything is possible. And so I found myself deep in the heart of Georgia, deep in the heart of community with fabulous hospitality, which is the space that citizen advocacy occupies. And I went there because I am a mum. My 3 adult children have all left home, and the work that I do as Katie's mum is to keep her in community, visible, where her gifts and skills are brought in to share with other people. I've also been a citizen advocate coordinator in Auckland, and my friend Susan and I have been together in citizen advocacy for 20 years, and Susan is part of our family. Recently, Susan, at the age of 17, was placed in an institution. She has spent the last 17 years in a disability provider, and in December of last year, Susan shifted into a home she can now call her own, and she has just celebrated her 65th birthday. So, age does not matter. I think in my little notebook, in one of my journeys, I wrote this: we need to belong, we need to feel valued, we need to know we're good at something, and we need to know that we have a secure future. And when I went out with citizen advocacy and Katina and Amanda and Dorona, I met people who looked like they had no hope, who looked like they had no power and little control. I met people who didn't know why they were in the day service. They didn't know why they were in the hospital setting, and they had no idea when they were going to get out. There were people who were so hungry for human touch that within 10 minutes of saying hello to them, they were sharing stories of deep wounding. There was one that I carry a very minor wound on my chest because there was a young lass who had a bit of a thump on my arm and a scratch. I wasn't quick enough, and I'm usually pretty quick. Deep scratch, because I think what she was saying was, "Don't go, please notice me." I chose Citizen Advocacy Exchange because I wanted to know more about how people who are disenfranchised are supported to make informed decisions. And because citizen advocacy has always been in the space of supporting people to make decisions about how they want to live their lives. And in my professional capacity at Spectrum Care as Change and Practice Manager, we are thinking very seriously about how we support people to make decisions. And I think we need to be really clear about a shared language. For me, there's making informed decisions, which is what we all do and is informal. There's making supported decisions, which are informal. There's making substituted decisions for others, which is still informal. And then we have substituted decision making mandated through the legal system, and we have much more thinking to do in this space about how we support people to make decisions. Because Lorna advised me 5 minutes ago I had about 3 minutes to talk, I just want to leave you with this thought. Every single one of us in this room is an active citizen. Every one of us has the ability to advocate for ourselves and others. Every one of us has the capacity to be a citizen advocate and to be of support and walk alongside one person and advocate for them to enjoy active citizenship. And guess what? It's free. It is a freely given relationship. Because citizen advocates are not paid to be in people's lives. My friend Susan only has one unpaid person in her life, and I have work to do to bring in the gifts of others. Just imagine if every person who needed one had a citizen advocate, and just imagine a world where no one needed a citizen advocate. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. I'll be very brief in summary, but I just really want to reflect that Bruce made a call for us to take up the challenge of becoming a movement. And then listening to citizen advocacy. Could citizen advocacy itself be the beginning of a movement? Because if we all stood alongside of a disabled or a family in this way, we come to the comment that was made on the video, don't think we can't do something, because we can. Just before we break, because I know if we give you guys a second, man, the volume in this room just escalates. I did tell you a lie yesterday. I told you that the marketplace would be in the Senate room. It won't. It's going to be in the South American room, which is the room just out of that door. So it's time for break now, but if we could reassemble in the South American room at 11:30. The marketplace participants will have 2 to 3 minutes to explain to you what's on their stall. The rest of the time will be for you to visit those stalls to gather the information that you wish. The stalls will remain over the lunch period so people can come and go. And just before you get really excited for morning tea, when we reconvene after lunch, it will be at 2 o'clock in the ballroom with our mental health colleagues. Thank you very much.